In our previous video, we began our discussion of the writing process for the independent writing task, starting with an overview of the standard college essay format, then focusing specifically on writing the introduction. Again, the TOEFL Quick Prep download does not include a sample independent writing task, so we're using a different topic for this video series. So in the previous video, we talked a little bit about the thesis. Let's review this idea. The thesis is what we consider to be the direct answer to the question in the topic. It is a statement that more or less tells the reader what you're going to prove in the rest of the essay. And so we said or suggested that you need to think of this as sort of a roadmap for the essay. Now recall that in the introduction, the thesis is the last part of the actual introductory paragraph. Again, we discussed in the previous video about the idea of the hook, and now we kind of are just reviewing the idea of what the thesis is. And this is going to play a very important part as we begin to start thinking about writing the rest of the essay. Now again, the thesis, as we said, is almost always at the end of the introduction, usually the last one or two sentences. It helps provide direction and even suggests a structure for the rest of the essay. And notice how the body of the essay will almost always relate to the thesis. But one key thing we recalled is that it needs to be general enough that you don't give away too much information. So again, our key to think about with the thesis is we don't want to be too specific. The idea, of course, is that it needs to be general enough to give the reader an idea of what's coming, but not necessarily include the actual reasons you're going to use to explain the rest of the essay. In the previous video, we discussed some basic thesis patterns. So for example, for the defense essay, we suggested something like this. The reasons for why I agree or disagree will be explored. Or I will elaborate on why I agree or disagree or prefer and give reasons and explanations. Or there are several reasons for why I believe this, and this will be the focus of my essay. Or these will be the focus of my essay. So again, these are just suggestions that we might want to consider when we focus on different essay types. For comparison essays, we did say that this one's going to be a little more specific. Remember, comparison essays involve the idea of comparing or discussing benefits, advantages, disadvantages, and so on. And generally, we need to conclude with our preference. Finally, with explanatory essays, we suggested that you might want to say something like, I will explain why I would do this, or I will provide reasons and explanations as to why I believe whatever. Again, it will depend on the essay that you're writing. So, in speaking of the writing process, let's think about where we are right now in this process. So in the first couple of videos, we talked a lot about how to plan before we write. And again, we're talking mostly about how to write a good essay, not necessarily planning during the short amount of time we're given during the test. Obviously, you need to put in lots of practice if you're going to become better at writing an essay in 30 minutes. And then we kind of began talking about in the second video, writing the introduction, talking about the hook of the essay, and of course developing the thesis. So in our video today, we're going to begin talking about writing the body of the essay. And of course the body is, again, what I think is probably the most important part when considering how to write a response on the TOEFL. Again, we mentioned that there is an introduction, so we've been talking about that. The body, of course, which I believe is, again, the most important part of the essay. And then in later videos, we'll discuss the conclusion. So now by looking at the body, let's talk a little bit about it. Generally, on the TOEFL, a body needs to have probably at least 2 paragraphs. A paragraph for each reason that you're going to be discussing. And then each paragraph is going to show how it connects to the thesis by using a topic sentence that will introduce the reason. Now we'll demonstrate here shortly. So I'm going to highlight the body now using a different color so that we know that we're focusing specifically on this part of the essay. So again, in thinking about the body, as we said, the body comprises at least two different paragraphs. Now in each paragraph is going to contain a topic sentence and then give us supporting details and examples to explain why we believe what we believe. So in our first essay, first idea, we're going to be looking at creating our first paragraph, our first reason, and how we can connect to the introduction of the essay. And then later we're going to look at the second paragraph, again exploring how we can draft a second topic sentence and how that will also continue to connect to the introduction. Now, in developing a topic sentence, the topic sentence usually is the first sentence of each paragraph, and this helps to introduce the reason or argument you're trying to make. Each topic sentence needs to relate to the thesis to provide what we might refer to as a backbone for the actual essay. Now, I've used lots of images for us to think about, but I do want you to think about the essay in a sense as being sort of like the human body. So in this case, the top of the human body, I want you to think of as sort of like it's the brain. Well, that would be what we might consider the introduction. That's kind of giving us the the overview of what we're going to see in the rest of the essay. The body, on the other hand, really does kind of comprise the part that holds everything together. So in this part of human anatomy, we might think of this as the backbone or the spine of the essay. So in other words, it's going to kind of hold all of the body together. So we need to think of this as certainly kind of as our core idea. Now, just to continue this idea of the image, in our body we have this sort of central nervous system. So the brain, which we referred to previously as the introduction, does in a way connect to that backbone through a system of nerves called the spinal cord. So what I want you to notice is how the spinal cord itself does connect back to the introduction through these nerves, this nerve kind of core that we have. So think of the topic sentences really as those nerve endings that help connect back to the thesis that we constructed in the introduction, in our brain. I don't know if the image helps you, but I think it's an interesting way to look at how we construct an essay. So again, think of those nerves that we have throughout our body as kind of the idea of connecting back to the introduction. Now, once again, our topic is focusing on the difference between team sports and individual sports. Now, you might recall in the previous video, I went ahead and chose the idea of team sports, mostly because that's where a lot of my experience came from. So now, in beginning to think about how can we connect the first paragraph and the second paragraph to the thesis, the key is to think about how that topic sentence is going to connect. Now, I think it's a good idea to use kind of general images like this, but I think it's even better if we use specific information. So at this point, I've gone ahead and drafted an introductory paragraph that includes a hook that we talked about in our previous video. This particular hook we called the social value hook, or the personal experience hook. And then, of course, we're going to analyze the thesis itself here in just a moment. So in my thesis, I've highlighted here in red. Let's take a look at it. So in this essay, I would like to explore these lessons. Now, these lessons are referring to the life lessons that I talk about here in the hook, and how these lessons showed me that team sports have much more to teach than individual ones. So, here's how I'm going to construct the topic sentences for my paragraphs. The first lesson I learned was the value of teamwork. The second lesson I learned was the value of humility. So notice here how the words lessons connect back to the idea of the lessons that I'm discussing, and how this team sport value kind of is going to be connected here in the rest of my essay. So there's my first one. The first one is the value of teamwork, connecting back to team sports. And the second one is also connecting back. There's a certain value that came from team sports, and this idea of humility. So, topic sentences, again, are kind of like mini introductions to each paragraph in the body. They help show how each body paragraph will connect to the thesis, and of course to the introduction as well. Now, the important thing, though, is to recognize that they need to include clear language that helps to show how the entire essay is organized. And that's how the idea of signal words is going to come in and help us. Now, you might remember from the reading video series and the listening video series, and of course we've repeated this in the speaking video series, how signal words are very important when it comes to understanding organization. So we're going to take a few minutes to take a look and review some of these ideas that we've talked about in previous videos. The idea of signal words. Now again, we said the essay itself really does depend on strong organization. So in addition to following the actual format, again, we referred to it in the previous video as a 3.5 essay, or on the TOEFL where we can call it a 2.4, it's important to use signal words to show how the body paragraphs connect together. Obviously, these good connecting words provide a better flow to the essay, and they help give a clear sequence or logic to the reasons we provide. So if you notice, I used the word lessons to help connect back to the idea of lessons. I used the word lessons to help connect back to the idea of lessons that we see in the introduction or paragraph. Now, in general, signal words fall into different categories, and you will see a link listed below the video where I will direct you to a list of signal words that I would really recommend that you learn. But let's look at some of the more common signal words we might see in a typical essay. Obviously, sequence signals are very helpful. They help to provide a certain organization, such as first and second, next, or finally. Sequences, signals that often change direction, words such as however, or unlike the previous idea. Other helpful words are words that help continue an idea, such as furthermore, moreover, or in addition. Signals that give cause and effect, because of this. Signals that help give examples, such as for example. And, of course, words that are very important, especially with the comparison essays, are when we're comparing and contrasting ideas, such as on the other hand. Now, since we're talking about topic sentences, generally the signals that we see in these topic sentences we often call introducers, or introductory phrases. And they kind of help indicate how one paragraph might connect to the paragraph before it. It's typical to use a comma to separate these ideas from the rest of the sentence, though it may not always be necessary. For example, in the sentence, first I learned the lesson of humility, I need a comma here after the word first. But if I say the first lesson I learned, we don't need a comma here. Again, it's a minor point to think about, but the idea here is that these are help introducing the ideas, introducing the reasons that I'm about to explain. So let's explore them a little more deeply. As we said earlier, good topic sentences are essential to the overall organization of the essay. As mentioned earlier, they're kind of like the nerve system or the spine of the essay, which we kind of referred to in general as the body. So again, another image to think about here is there's that brain, as we mentioned before. That's our introduction. And the part where the body, or the spinal cord in this case, meets the introduction really is that transition called the thesis. The thesis helps to kind of provide what we're going to see in the rest of this essay. So again, the body, think of that as the spinal cord, the groups of nerves that are really kind of being directed or controlled by the introduction. So again, the idea is I want you to think that the topic sentences are actually part of the entire essay itself. They're all kind of connected, even though they're distinct as well. They help introduce us to those individual nerves or reasons or arguments that we will be addressing throughout the essay. And as we said before, those topic sentences really do help connect back to the main ideas. So again, you need to become more familiar with these different signal words, and especially thinking about how they might contribute to the overall organization. So think about that each essay type, even though you could use many different kinds of signals, there are certain signals or transitions that might be more common to use with these essay types than others. So for example, in a defense essay, we might use more sequence signals or continuation signals since we're kind of explaining ideas. This could also be the same for the explanatory type essay. However, for the comparison essay, we also might want to consider using change of direction or compare and contrast signals because we want to indicate that we're changing direction from one idea to the next. Now, of course, you could use signals, different kinds of signals, in all kinds of essay patterns. There are also some that really are not necessarily topic specific. Again, words that might give a cause or effect, or even again, I think a signal that you might use in almost all of these essay types, example signals, such as for example or for instance. As I mentioned before, for more signal words, there'll be a link below this video for a more complete list. Again, I've referenced this list before in previous videos, but I often think it's very helpful for students to have a copy of this in front of them. And again, I would highly recommend that you study them because you need to incorporate these signals in order to improve your essay writing ability. Now let's kind of look at different essay types and think about, for example, the different types of signal words we could use. Now again, we're kind of jumping to different topics here just for a moment to demonstrate how some of these might work. So let's look at this sample explanatory topic. What do you consider to be the most important room in a house? Why is this room more important to you than any other room? Use specific reasons and examples to support your opinion. Now what I've done here is I've drafted a sample introductory paragraph, and I want to show how we can connect these ideas using specific signals. So let's take a look at the introductory paragraph. It is always said that a house is not a home until you've had your first housewarming party. In many cultures, this tradition almost always involves music, perhaps dancing, wine, but most certainly food. This, along with other reasons, is why I think the kitchen is the most important room in the house. Now, if you notice in the body how I'm going to use signals to help kind of connect to the thesis itself, and then also how I kind of provide a certain sequence, especially focusing on the words I use in the topic sentences. So notice in reason number one reason I choose the kitchen is because of its central importance in housing and storing food. Look at my second paragraph, my second reason. Another reason for choosing the kitchen involves its place as the gathering place for the whole family, especially at meal times. So you can notice how I use reasons, the same word I referred to in my thesis, to help provide a kind of sequence or flow. One reason and then another reason. Again, these are referred to as sequence words. But notice I used the same word, or at least a similar word, to help connect back to the thesis. So in this case, in this example with an explanatory essay, I used a sequence signal to help provide kind of a flow from one idea to the next. Okay, now look at a comparison essay. Some people choose friends who are different from themselves. Others choose friends who are similar. Compare the advantages of having friends who are different from you with the advantages of having friends who are similar to you. Which kind of friend do you prefer for yourself and why? So again, I've drafted here just kind of a sample introduction, and we're going to see how we used signals in the topic sentences especially to help provide kind of a sense of organization. So again, let's look at my introductory paragraph. When I was in high school, I had the chance to take many different classes, both college preparatory and vocational. Not only did these courses help broaden my mind, but they also introduced me to people I never would have met if I had chosen to stay on the university track. Both of these experiences gave me the opportunity to compare the advantages of having friends similar to me with the advantages of having friends who were different from me. Now notice how in the body, how I connect to the thesis itself, and again thinking specifically about sequences. The advantages of having friends who were similar to me were numerous, but one that was particularly important was, in my second paragraph, on the other hand, it was very refreshing to get to hang out with friends who were different from me during the school day, mainly because... Now again, notice how I use the word advantages, which help connect back to the original idea in the thesis, but then I also use this change of direction, this contrast signal. On the other hand, this helps signal the fact that I was moving from the advantages of similar friends to friends who were different from me. I also want you to notice that I used different signals to help explain other things. For example, I kind of gave the idea that I'm going to provide an example or explain one of these reasons, and now I'm going to list it here. In the second example, I give kind of a cause and effect signal, and I explain because, and then I'm going to explain why. So notice that in my comparison essay, I not only used a sample change of direction, but I also made sure I had signals that helped connect back to the thesis, and then of course other signals that helped transition what was going to go from the first part of the topic sentence to the second part of the topic sentence. So, topic sentences help connect back to the thesis, oftentimes using similar language, words such as reasons or advantages. They kind of serve as a mini introduction for each body paragraph to prepare the reader for what to expect. And topic sentences also use good signal words to show not only how they connect to the thesis, but how the body paragraphs are going to connect to each other. So again, if I'm using a sequence signal, one paragraph is going to say first, and then the next paragraph will show how it connects by saying second or another reason. So again, topic sentences are very important in getting people to be able to follow the ideas that we're trying to explain. So at this stage in writing the body, let's think a little bit more in drafting our particular topic. And part of that is trying to connect back to what we did in the previous videos by thinking a lot more about our personal examples. So the idea here is that during the planning stage, we did a lot of brainstorming. But the key is we want to think about, well, maybe we came up with a lot of reasons or examples, but we really need only about 2 to 3 to include in the writing task. Now this is going to bring up an important word that we need to kind of explore a little bit, and that's the idea of relevance. When I choose particular examples or experiences, I may want to think about which experiences kind of connect the most to the idea, and also which can connect to the larger issues in life. Now, my real opinion here is that the TOEFL asks these particular questions or topics because they really want to see, can you think more deeply about life? So I think that's something that we need to consider in answering this question. When we think about team sports, for example, do team sports connect to life in a bigger way? That could be something we might want to think about as we move along. Now, you might recall in the previous video, we did a concept map. And during that activity, we kind of explored an example of team sports. I focused on academic team, but of course team sports in general, we could use the same kind of reasons or ideas. So I want you to imagine that these are some of the ideas that we discussed in our previous video, and of course I added a couple more. But I want you to imagine that this is what I created in the planning stage when I thought about what are the particular reasons for why I might like team sports. Now let's look at my 4 choices here. One reason I mentioned in the previous video was because teams often help provide a balance of strengths and weaknesses. I might be weak in a particular area, but someone else might be particularly strong. One thing we also mentioned is that when you join a team, you often might meet people of similar interests. Of course, we also said that during this opportunity, because of the strengths and weaknesses ideas, we can learn from other people. If I'm weak in a particular area, someone might teach me how to be strong in a particular area. Now, a new idea that I didn't mention, but I kind of thought about as I was thinking more about the topic, is the idea of humility. And that's going to be important here. I'm going to discuss that more as we move along. But I found this was an important concept too when thinking about team sports. You see, the idea of humility was that I realized that I didn't necessarily need to be the most important person, and clearly it would hurt the team if I thought that I was the most important person. So in this case, humility is a way to show that other ideas, or perhaps even the team itself, is bigger than you, is more important than you. So the idea here is that a team is more important than the individual. So I considered this to be the idea of humility. Now, and the idea here is when I was looking at my reasons, I really felt like these two were the most relevant to the idea of proving why team sports was better. In fact, I thought learning from others is something that I could even include when I'm talking about the balance of strengths and weaknesses. So I kind of felt like that maybe this idea was better described under this idea. So I felt like if I had to choose 2 reasons from the 4 that I drafted here, maybe these 2 would be the best. Now, of course, while you're planning for this particular essay, maybe you had different reasons. In fact, maybe you chose individual sports instead of team sports. But the idea is I want you to look at your reasons and think which ones are the most relevant for you. So again, I chose these 2 choices because to me they seemed the most relevant. But I really thought of these as directly as being the products of working on a team. The other 2 choices, for example, people with similar interests, I really felt like you could do that in other situations too, not just on a team. It could be just any fun activity that you might, you could do, like going to see a movie with a friend. But in this case, I really felt like humility and thinking about the balance of strengths and weaknesses, that's really only something I can get in a team-like situation. So that's why I chose those 2. But I also chose them for a different reason. And again, I think that the TOEFL is looking for many things, I think. But really, I do believe it really wants to see, are you good at connecting these questions to larger life issues? Now, you'll see a little bit more about that in a moment. But first, it's time to play a little activity that I like to call, What's the Point? Now, here are the rules. I'm going to show you 3 topics, 1 from each essay type. With each topic, I'm going to show you around 3 to 4 reasons or examples. And I want you to think about which 2 do you believe to be the most relevant. Now, I'm going to give you 30 seconds as you look at each one, and I want you to choose. At the end of 30 seconds, I'm going to show you which ones I think might be more relevant or the most relevant. And you might want to, we may have some disagreements, of course, but the idea is to see, do you agree with me or not? Well, here we go. So, let's begin. So, it is better for children to grow up in the countryside than in a big city. Do you agree or disagree? Use specific reasons and examples to develop your essay. Now, I'm going to say that I agree that it's better to grow up in the countryside. So, here are 4 reasons that I'm going to come up with. I'm going to give you 30 seconds to begin. Look at each of them now. So, here are the 4 reasons that I've come up with. Now I'm going to give you 30 seconds. What I want you to do is, during those 30 seconds, read the 4 choices, and then choose which 2 do you think might be the most relevant. Let's begin. Okay, time's up. So which 2 did you think seemed to be the most relevant to the idea of living on the countryside? Well, again, the key for me was to think about with children, when children grow up. And I think really for me, one thing that I can think about is that children really do need a connection to nature. So I really felt like that this was important when it came to raising children. Now, as I looked at the other choices that I came up with, I felt like peaceful living was actually part of this idea of connecting to nature. So to me, I feel like I could maybe describe peaceful living under the same idea. I also felt like perhaps that pollution and traffic could fit to this idea as well, since it is kind of the idea of connecting to nature. But I also felt like it could connect to the other idea, which in this case I think for me is the other relevant idea of living a little bit more free of distractions. Obviously, we think about living in the city, we've got lots of different things that could be potentially harmful for children. So I often thought, well, with the countryside, they could be free of these distractions, these problems, such as pollution, traffic, and so on. So for me, I felt like these 2 were the more relevant, and that the other 2 I could even explain as part of the other 2 ideas. Now again, that's just my opinion. you might have some different thoughts, and of course you may even have different reasons that I didn't even think about. Let's try another one. Nowadays, food has become easier to prepare. Has this change improved the way people live? Use specific reasons and examples to support your answer. So once again, I want you to look. I have chosen the idea that food has improved, and here are 4 reasons that I've listed here. Once again, I'll give you 30 seconds to look at them, and then see if you can think of which 2 might be the most relevant. Okay, so which 2 did you choose? Well, first off, I think we can think that food quality has improved. Certainly one idea that I thought of the first was the idea that, of course, it keeps food fresher longer. This was always a problem with the food in the past because most of the time you would go shopping almost every day because food would generally spoil very quickly. Or even if you put it in the refrigerator, the idea is if it wasn't in some kind of packaging, it could spoil a little bit faster. Okay? I think really the other choice I can think of was the idea that because of this improvement, I thought it also led to perhaps less time to prepare and more time to do other things. Again, the idea here is that it used to take a lot longer to put food together because you had to actually put all the ingredients together. But prepackaged food might actually take less time and give me more time to do other things. Now, of course, I think about with better packaging might lead to more food shipment. That could also be a pretty good idea. Now, of course, this last one here may be one that you completely disagree with. You might think that food actually, that the taste or quality has not improved at all. So again, maybe this is one that's not so relevant. But these were the 2 that I chose. Again, you may have a different opinion. Okay, now we're going to do one more. This is a comparison essay. Let's look at it. It is generally agreed that society benefits from the work of its members. Compare the contributions of artists to society with the contributions of scientists to society. Which type of contribution do you think is valued more by your society? Give specific reasons to support your answer. Now again, we're just kind of thinking about the idea that we have to look at both sides. So we're actually going to do this activity twice. One thinking about the artists, and then another thinking about the scientists. So first, let's start with the artists. Here are the 4 that I came up with. I'm going to give you 30 seconds. See which 2 you would choose. Okay, which two did you focus on? Well, certainly one that I thought of when I think about art in general is that art helps us expand our personal horizons. We can kind of look at art and think about it, that how it helps us to grow and understand life in a better way. And of course, I kind of felt like that would also be somewhat of a connection to appreciation of beauty. So I might be able to include these 2 ideas together. I also felt like that part of the idea of expanding horizons may also be connected to a better understanding of the human condition. So I could either make that part of the same idea, or maybe I might think of this as its own reason. So in this situation, I might want to consider this to be a separate reason. Now, of course, the key is to think about artists, obviously can give us an appreciation of beauty, but not necessarily. Oftentimes it may be difficult to understand art in general. But of course, I think appreciation of beauty is part of it. Now, in terms of bringing peace to our lives, well, again, that could be a very personal or subjective idea. So you might have thought that one would be a good choice too. But these are the two that I thought of. Okay, now let's think about scientists. So now we're going to think about scientists. So again, here are my four choices. I'm going to put 30 seconds on the clock. See which two you would choose. Okay. Well, first off, if I kind of saw some of these ideas kind of connecting to each other. For example, I think of scientists as definitely improving the quality of our life. So this was one that I felt like was very important. But I also noticed that medicine and longer life could also fit under those same ideas. So in this case, I kind of felt like that maybe these all belonged in the same sort of general reason. Now, for technological innovations, of course, this could also be considered perhaps a way to improve the quality of our life. So again, I think maybe we could either put this under the same idea, and maybe we could treat these ideas in a different way. But I think I might consider technological innovations to be a separate idea. So for example, like using computers, for example, as a way to help improve our lives, or at least to be able to facilitate those things. So again, you might have chose two different ones or thought of them in a different way, but these were the two that I kind of considered. So the idea of relevance, I do want to make it clear that really there are no right or wrong choices, but I want you to make sure that you choose choices that are relevant to what you're trying to say. And in our first video, actually, we discussed the importance of logic. We want to make sure we make logical arguments too. And also, we want to make sure we choose reasons that give us enough opportunity to develop interesting points. If we choose ideas that are a little too specific, or perhaps not relevant, that could certainly hurt the essay in general. But I also want us to think about those particular topics that we can connect to, perhaps, in a more personal way. And because I think, in general, we can write better when we connect to them personally. Our final discussion point here in the video is the idea of what actually paragraph development means. Now, according to Anne Hogue, who is the author of the excellent book, The Essentials of English, a writer's handbook, a paragraph is a group of related sentences that discuss one, and usually one, main idea. Generally, when we think about paragraph length, I think really a minimum of 3 sentences might be too short. That's kind of my opinion, but generally I think 3 sentences would be the absolute minimum. And then the maximum, if we had 10 to 15, again, that might be a little too long. So you might think of a paragraph as somewhere in the middle. But again, you'll notice on the TOEFL, especially if you look at real examples, generally, a paragraph might have only 2 or 3 sentences. But again, we're trying to think about good writing skills too. So again, as we said, in the body, when we're thinking about writing the body, we think of the body as kind of starting with a topic sentence. We have a few sentences in the middle, and then we have a concluding sentence. Now, in terms of the actual kind of overall paragraph organization, especially thinking about the body, as we said before, we start with a topic sentence, and then notice that we probably will connect in some way to a personal example. And that personal example will provide some supporting details for what we're trying to say. Then we might want to consider connecting to the main reason, again, also including some supporting details. And then finally, the paragraph will have a conclusion. Now, the key is to think about that in this particular order. We could make a switch, as we progress throughout the paragraph. It's possible we might want to put the main reason first and then the personal example next, or that we might want to, break up the personal example. There are different ways that we can do this. But in general, this is kind of a common paragraph organization. So with our topic, thinking about the team sports idea, you will notice, going back to the example I started discussing a little bit earlier in the video, we think about the idea that teamwork was our first point. So watch how we're going to develop this particular paragraph. So first off, we start with that topic sentence. The first lesson I learned was the value of teamwork. Now watch how I develop our second part of the paragraph. So as I'm typing this out, I think about, well, how can I sort of demonstrate this in a very visual way? Well, again, I said think about maybe a personal example. So let's look at my personal example with supporting details. So again, the first lesson I learned was the value of teamwork. As the point guard on the team, I had to understand the strengths and weaknesses of the different players on the team. I had to know when to pass the ball and help set up my teammates to give us an advantage when we needed to score. And even sometimes I would need to know when to take the ball and score on my own. So notice how I used the personal example to demonstrate this importance of teamwork. Watch what comes next. So again, as I'm typing, I want you to notice how I try to connect my example to the main reason, and that is the importance of teamwork. Now, once again, recall that on the TOEFL, I think what they're really looking for is your ability to connect this information to real life. So notice how I describe it here with this particular connection, the idea of the real world. So this is very much like what happens in real life. Teamwork is very important once you enter the real world of work. In most businesses and organizations, working with other people on a team is often a job requirement. In order to function well on a team, you have to know what the strengths and weaknesses are of the members on the team and even of yourself. So if you notice how I connect the idea, and then I think about how it connects to the real world. Now, of course, as we said, you don't have to follow this exact order of information, but I find it helpful because oftentimes when I'm thinking about a topic, I usually try to relate immediately to a personal example and how that personal example might show how I connect to this idea. And again, notice the supporting details I give. Thinking about working in a business because obviously working on a team is a job requirement. Now finally, there is the conclusion. We're going to talk more about the concluding sentence in the next video. But I want you to notice how I try to connect the conclusion of the paragraph back to my first idea, the value of teamwork. So notice in this case, playing on a team sport helped prepare me for this valuable skill I would need later in life. And honestly, I think often many of us think about sports, especially sports when we were young, the purpose of sports really was to teach us about life. So in this case, I thought it would be appropriate to mention that playing on that team helped me prepare for that skill. Now, it's a couple of things to keep in mind when we're writing an essay. Many times students just want to keep typing and not think a little bit about the format of the paragraph. Now, for example, the topic sentence, generally we can indicate or signify the topic sentence by using the tab key on our keyboard, because what that will do is help indent the paragraph. Next, I'm going to try to bring all of the sentences together to make it look a little more unified. Now it all looks like it's part of the same paragraph. However, it does look a little long. I could obviously take out some sentences if I thought so. Or, and again, this is perfectly fine, I could take my one paragraph and break it up into two separate paragraphs. Now, of course, you might be thinking, doesn't that make the essay seem longer? Or doesn't this mean I'm adding more paragraphs to the body? Well, again, that's perfectly fine. One thing we need to think about is each paragraph is discussing something a little different, but they're both kind of relating to the same idea. In fact, remember, I started by talking about that first lesson. Well, the next body paragraph won't occur until I mention the next lesson. But what I want you to notice is how when I broke the paragraphs up, each paragraph focuses on a slightly different idea. Here it's talking about the idea of sports. In my other paragraph, it's talking about how it connects to real life. Again, this is perfectly fine to do on an essay. Paragraphs themselves are very flexible. They can be as short or as long as we need them to be, and if they get a little too long, it might be a good idea to separate them. So, some final thoughts. As we said, a paragraph needs to follow what we call a logical progression of ideas. Though there are many organizational patterns, I think the ones that we listed here or discussed work pretty well for those essays, especially those you find on the TOEFL. I think it's important to remember that using personal examples is possible. It's very important. But it's also important to connect those examples to the main reason you're trying to make. And think about how this relates to perhaps any larger life issues if necessary. As we said before, signal words. Signal words are extremely important in the idea of topic sentences, but we also can use them throughout the paragraph. Now, in the next video, we're going to explore a couple of ideas that help us show how the paragraphs are going to stick together a little bit better. But these ideas are referring to the concepts of cohesion and unity. So again, in the next video, we'll discuss how cohesion, unity, and signal words really help to make the paragraph sort of fit together. And of course, not only together within each paragraph, but also to other paragraphs. So in our recommended materials, once again, we have lots of good TOEFL references and information, but I also want to point out, as we discussed in this video, another excellent book when it comes to writing is The Essentials of English by Anne Hogue. This is a publication of Pearson Longman. And I've used this book in several of my classes, and I think it's an excellent textbook to help teach the process of writing. So obviously we're kind of discussing, thinking about TOEFL preparation for the test, but I also think that this part of the TOEFL specifically is trying to help you become a better student as well. So again, I really would recommend looking up The Essentials of English by Anne Hogue. I think it's an excellent book to help you in this process. It also has a lot of great grammar explanations and other things that are also related to English writing. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time for Part 4, Continuing the Body.